Hi, I'm Bruce Fergus and I classify my work as creative wood art. It involves turning and carving and sculpting, painting and using other materials as well. So it's really cool. We live on the edge of Cloudy Bay on the Whirlwood Plains. It's about halfway between Blenheim and Picton and a really great spot. My wife Lizzie and I were looking for something that we might be able to do together because up until about the mid-90s my main hobby had been playing music, but all my band friends had left town and gone off to better pastures further afield. Quite by chance we came across an event where people were turning wood, and I thought, gosh, that's fascinating. And so we thought we would have a go at doing this jointly. I really loved it and continued that whole process of turning wood. Joined a local club, found out what you could do and couldn't do technically, and then became interested in the more artistic left field, so to speak, work in turning. And all the creative stuff started from that point. Wood is a very forgiving material to work with. Given that my initial exposure to doing the artwork was as a wood turner, wood is the obvious thing for wood turners to work with. Like a lot of Kiwi fellas, wood is something you feel that you can work with. Anybody can do this. But no, it's a medium that requires a lot of hard work and skill and practice. Because when you're turning wood, you're really exposing what's inside, and until you've got there you don't really know what's around. But the lathe, which is the main tool for turning, has just become another tool for me. So it's not the driver, it's just something that you have on hand, so that imposing ideas on the medium is probably the way things go at the moment, as opposed to having a look and see, so that the ideas are generated and the wood then just becomes a medium for that work. I do a lot of work in series, so that a series, for example, as Cosmos, is images that you could see if you looked up into the sky, or antiquities, where doing things based on, for example, Egyptian hieroglyphs, or ancient Greek art, or Pacifica is a very strong series because that's where we live. So the inspiration and the ideas tend to come from those sorts of backgrounds. Yeah, well, the Pacifica stuff has, because I'm very strong on shape and form. I do very little in the way of figurative art. It's mostly abstract and semi-abstract, because I like to challenge the viewers so that when they get to the point of saying, aha, oh yes, now I see it, that's what I really like. It's not the cultural aspects of the art, it's more the physical ones, so that the ocean, the islands, the sea life, the bird life, the sky, rather than the people. The Pacific in, let's say, geographic terms as opposed to cultural ones. If you look at waveforms and currents in the ocean, they tend to flow and curve and move. And in some of my Pacific works, I try to create that same sort of feeling, so that shapes or the silhouettes of pieces might have that flowing line in them. And the colours and textures of the ocean, because they keep changing, I try to incorporate those sorts of things in my works as well. As with most Kiwis, a lot of the holidays are spent at the beach, or alternatively in places like Central Otago, so that if I move away from the Pacifica series and look at some of the more geological and geographic fields, then the starkness, for example, of the Southern Alps and the almost desert continent conditions in Central Otago have also been an influence. And events sometimes spark off things that happen, as for example with the Christchurch earthquakes. a number of works emerged from that setting that were interesting to create. The idea of collaboration has always been a strong factor of mine, having played music in bands where you obviously need to collaborate to achieve success. All my sporting activity has essentially been team-based, so I like working with other people and do so quite well. I have a number of colleagues here in Marlborough with whom I work. Kim Gabara, who is a painter and works in found metals, and a ceramicist, Renata von Pettersdorf, and between us we create some really interesting works. In 1961, the Kingston Trio came to New Zealand, and at that time I had, quite by chance, been able to purchase a 5-string banjo. The folk music scene was starting then, and I was one of the people who got folk music going in Dunedin in a variety of ways, and that, in a brief history, went from folk music generally to Pete Seeger and his group the Weavers specifically, and then into old-time mountain music, and then in the early 70s into bluegrass music, which I am an aficionado of, and I play most of the bluegrass instruments and am still a keen follower of bluegrass music. And the inspiration that one gets from, and the buzz from playing a gig, whether it's to 50 people or 5,000, it's still there. And that excitement translates itself into the completion of what is now a tangible piece of art rather than a passing moment. One of the things that many artists struggle with is, am I making my works to sell, or am I making them to please myself as well as others? I make quite a distinction between pieces that I make for me or for my family, in other words, works not to be sold. They have a significance to me as a person as well as an artist. Those are quite different from the pieces that I create for sale. My background, essentially, before coming to full-time artwork, was lecturing in business at Otago Polytechnic, so I've got a very strong feel for the business world and what makes it tick, as well as the creative world, initially through my music and now through my visual art. Yeah, the piece emerged from an exhibition that my colleague Neville Parker and I did a number of years back called Word, and part of my approach to that exhibition was to create haiku verse pieces and use old languages or old alphabets to visualise those verses. This particular piece, triangular physically, it is shaped like the prow of a boat, and the 3 edges are bounded with what is an old Celtic form of writing called ogham. The piece itself not exactly celebrates but commemorates 2 of my mother's young uncles who perished on the SS Wairarapa on the 29th of October in 1894. The ship was heading towards Auckland, and the captain seemingly drove it directly onto the north shore of Great Barrier Island, and 133 people perished, including my 2 ancestors, hence the title of the piece. And the verse that I created for it, which is written in ogham on the piece, is "Young lives lost at sea, a mother's lament echoes through the long years." The reason for the last part of that statement is that their mother, upon hearing of the death of her 2 boys, became quite deranged and remained so for the rest of her life. So it was a tragedy in more ways than one for both New Zealand and for me personally. The piece, which is sitting on a mirror which enables you, when you look at the mirror and the piece itself, gives you the whole of a vessel. When you look at it directly from the front, you see the prow of the vessel, and sitting in the middle of this piece of wood, which is there by chance but chosen for that reason, a burl or a knot, which reflects in essence the Great Barrier Island, and the prow, the tip of the prow of the vessel is physically also alluding to the northern Cape Reinga in New Zealand. The boat was travelling towards Auckland at the time that it was wrecked. So that physically reflects the vessel, the place of the tragedy, given that its shape reflects with its edges the ability to use the Ogham alphabet, which is Celtic in origin and thousands of years old. So that the piece has got so many layers of meaning, and if you looked at it without this knowledge that I have, you'd be challenged to think, what on earth is this work about? But that's the story of it, and I love creating stories with pieces. There is one work that I have here, and this particular piece is called The Last Leaf, and it was one of the first works that I created when I came to Marlborough, and in the autumn saw the golden and brown leaves slowly falling off the vines, which is something, of course, that I'd never experienced in Dunedin. And what struck me was how incrementally the full leaf worked its way down to those last few leaves that fell off the vines. And it reminded me of a short story that I had read many, many years ago by an American author called O. Henry. And he wrote this short story entitled The Last Leaf. And essentially the short version of the story is that two young women lived in an apartment in New York. One of the young women fell ill with the flu. Her friend called upon the assistance of an old artist who lived upstairs to help look after her. The young woman developed a fever and was close to death, and she looked out her window, and there was a brick wall that had a vine growing up it, and she said, "When the last leaf falls, I will die." And every morning she looked out the window and that last leaf stayed there. But one night there was a storm, and in the morning they went down to the yard, and here was the old artist basically lying dead on the ground with his paintbrushes and ladder beside him. He had painted the last leaf. The young woman recovered. The piece that I created reflected the idea of the last leaf, as in O. Henry's idea, and the last leaf in Marlborough, as they fall from the vines.